So I think the first point is we must place our discussions in a larger context, in a larger social context. And in that larger social context is the struggle for democratization of our social order, which is reflected very beautifully in Article 38 of our Constitution, which makes the central mission of the entire republic the creation of a new social order, not economic order, not political order, but a new order. And that partly answers Safi's question, why this emphasis on social justice? Because Article 38 talks about a social order, not an economic order and political order, in which justice, social, economic, and political shall inform all institutions of national life. That's why I answered that student by saying that economic justice has to be provided in the context of social justice, and creating a just social order is the priority of this republic. So the first point I want to make is that we are in the middle of a huge struggle to overthrow. I don't believe it's 5,000 years old. I think it is much more recent. It is much more fragile. I don't think the system as we know it is what it is described to be. We know that there is a group of oligarchs who want to rule others, dominate others, and they've developed a culture of domination. The rest of us just want to be free from that domination. We don't have any ethos or culture that we assert we are superior to anybody as a culture, as our ideology. Some individuals may wrongly do that. Or we want to rule or dominate anyone else. We just want to get along. We don't spend all our time indoors. We all know that. We don't spend all our time talking about, who's superior to who's inferior to who, and who, looking down on others or making fun of others. That's not our culture. Some people have that culture, and we want to overthrow that culture. In this context, I think the big issue, constitutional issue for us, because all this conversation started with Vidyut asking, what should we do? What is our responsibility? What should each of us do? I think that is his main question. Okay, fine. What is an operational way in which to identify responsibilities of different groups of people in this context when India is facing a huge constitutional crisis? So I think the main responsibility, in one word, if you answer, that the one message I wanted to share is that we should narrative about this constitution, its context, and what it is and what it should do. Because today what is happening is there is a battle to control the narrative about the constitution, about its context, what it is, and what its role. We must focus on that narrative. So we have two broad narratives. One broad narrative is that the basic struggle in India is for economic development, to create economic opportunities for economic upliftment. Whether it is from a market perspective or from a socialist perspective or from a communist perspective, the focus is on improving the material condition of the people. And for that, the narrative is that the Constitution creates is a fundamental document that allocates responsibilities and powers to the state to bring about an improvement in the condition of the people. And the state is given wide latitude to improve the condition of the people, because even the so-called middle class and upper class from an economic point of view in India is much worse off than in other countries. As I was saying, 97% of people of India, according to global institutions, are low income. 97%. So there are a lot of middle class people and others who also want to improve their condition. So they see the basic struggle as improving material condition. Constitution as nothing more than allocating power to the government, giving power to the government to undertake this economic development. And the courts and others should help the government to maintain the necessary law and order, peace, stability, and obedience to ensure that they do whatever is. In other words, it's a Gujarat model. It's quite another thing that the level of development of common people in Gujarat has been very, very disappointing. If you go to Gujarat, you will see that the results of Gujarat's growth has, according to the state planning board, the state economic review of Gujarat, I think in 2013 or 14, just at the end of Mr. Modi's term before he became Prime Minister, the planning board document when he was Chief Minister records that the benefits of the economic growth in Gujarat have not been distributed to the people. But that model is what we are pursuing. And so don't question the government, and anyone who opposes whatever policy choices the government makes should be put aside, because India is impatient to become a fully developed nation, equivalent to the most powerful countries in the world. So this is one narrative. And don't interrupt this narrative with divisive discussions about social injustice, poverty, caste, all these things. This is all negative talk. Just commit yourself to implementing the vision of the government, Gujarat model. Do whatever the government says. This is one narrative. And in this narrative, the constitution is only a document power to the government, subject to very, very few safeguards. That is why, to some extent, into 2020, there is, there is no response by the courts to very important issues, because they may come in the way of this path of development. And so this is one narrative. The other narrative is here. And I think our responsibility is to develop a counter narrative. But what is the context in which the Constitution is working? What exactly is the Constitution? And what does it do? We find, ironically, in the Supreme Court on 10th February 2020, in a case, Prithviraj Chauhan, which has to do with SC/ST Atrocities Act, references to SC/ST Atrocities Act also. In a concurring judgment, not in the main judgment, Justice Ravindra Bhatt writes an excellent judgment in which he gives a new narrative about the Constitution. So the dominant narrative has been, first of all, 1980 SP Gupta. This is from the judiciary. It never got traction in India. It was never accepted by the political class or any other class. The 1980 narrative that came from Justice Krishna Iyer and Justice Bhagwati was, in the exact words of the Supreme Court in SP Gupta, 1980s, it is a charter for social revolution. Charter for social revolution. They did not go into caste and all that, but social revolution in terms of building a society with the equal citizenship rights of equality, freedom, liberty, and so on and so forth. That Supreme Court narrative that the Constitution is an instrument of social revolution was never picked up by anyone else, or even the general public, or even the legal profession, or even academia. Now, then the Supreme Court went to this narrative of policy. In the late 80s and early 90s, the Supreme Court switched to this narrative of India shining, which is now actually Hindu shining, not India shining, but Hindu shining, where development became the main purpose of the Constitution, and so the judiciary yielded to the executive, and executive is in the driving seat to take us to development. Judiciary is only to play a supporting role. That is now the dominant narrative in the judiciary, and here the judiciary was picking up the political narrative, not the other way around. Ravindra Bhatt brings in a new narrative, and that new narrative is that the Constitution, and I'll read that relevant line to you. The Constitution is a pact, 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 an agreement between people about the relationships that guarantee. This is the operative part. That the Constitution is an agreement, a pact between the people of India, different from this social, it is something like the social contract theory. It is picking up from that, but it's becoming more specific. It's a pact between the people about the relationships that they guarantee to each other. So it is similar to the social contract doctrine, which is very familiar. But that has not been accepted before by the Supreme Court. It has now been, at least in one judgment, in a concurring judgment, they are giving us a different narrative that they guarantee to each other, right? Now, this means that the state is also bound by this guarantee. So we, the people of India, are setting up a standard of human conduct, but what values will control our relationship with each other. So suddenly the Constitution is no longer either an instrument of bringing about, creating a charter for social revolution where it's a little more top down, that the Constitution is declaring certain rights and imposing that on the people, nor is it an instrument of development, or its vision is economic development, but it is simply a pact between people. Now, this narrative, I think, gives us a lot of opening, because then the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is this pact? What is the kind of relationship that we are guaranteeing each other? And the answer we find in the preamble and in part 3, and we'll come to that. But before that, this is a very, very important understanding, because the Constitution says, very importantly in the preamble, Constitution says, as you know, we the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into something. What is the meaning of the word constitute? It means to make something, to make something. The dictionary meaning of constitute is to form or make something, is to constitute something from different parts, to make something. So the preamble is saying in its first sentence, we the people of India have resolved to constitute India into something. So India exists before this. So India is something that exists, but we have decided to constitute India into something. We have not stopped at constitute India into something. So we take the parts of what is India. We take what is India and we are reassembling it. We are not doing something from thin air. We are taking India. India is also something that is constituted by something, into something. But we, the people of India, have solemnly resolved to constitute India into something else, to take what is India and rearrange it into something else. Into what? Sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. Now, this means that India, as it stood before 1950, was not a republic, obviously. So the parts that constituted India were arranged to be a monarchy. Basically, it was several monarchies, the British monarchy and local monarchy. So the elements that constituted that different monarchies, we the people are taking those elements and rearranging it to constitute, to make. What is that? Where we are making a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. And this is something completely new, because we've never had this before. And that is why it is called we can read the word Constitution of India like a story, the story of how India is being constituted. Constitution can be read as a process, not as a document. The Constitution of India, suppose I write a story, the Constitution of India, the making of India. You can replace the word constitution with the word making. The making of India. What is it? The remaking of India. The remaking of India. The new making of India. So we must understand the Constitution not as an administrative document. In fact, Ravindra Bhatt at the beginning of his judgment, he rejects this. He says, not rejects it. He says the Constitution of India is described variously as a charter of governance of the Republic, as a delineation of the powers of the state into its various manifestations. But he says this is not, it is much more than that. And he says it is an agreement between. So how do the people of India remake India? So let's now read the word Constitution of India as the remaking of India. And look at this book as a book titled The Remaking of India, or the new making of India. How are we going to do it? We are doing it through reaching an agreement about how we will treat each other. About how we will treat each other. We could have remade India on the basis of something else. For example, we want to constitute, we the people of India want to constitute India into a country that achieves 10% economic growth every year.
Sujit, please mute yourself. Sujit P. Surendran. Mute yamu.
Sir.
We preamble could have said, we the people of India have solemnly resolved to constitute India into the fastest growing economy in the world. But we didn't do that. Because why did Ravindra Bhatt say it is a pact about relationship? Because the preamble is simply a statement of how we will treat each other. Freedom is about how we treat each other. Equality is about how we treat each other. Fraternity is about how we treat each other. Justice is, as I've been always saying, is a standard of human conduct. It's about how we treat each other. And for that, we have chosen three ideologies at the center of which is not achieving economic growth, but achieving standards of how we treat each other. Secularism is how we treat each other, regardless of differences of religion. Socialism is about how we treat each other. Fair distribution, no concentration of wealth or ownership. Public the interest of we take care of each other's interests. A caring, kind, compassionate society is what we mean by socialism. Democracy, where Kratos' power is in the hands of the most common people.
Oh, Dinesh, please mute. Ellarum on the mute and Sradhikana. Dinesh unmuted somehow. Please ensure that your microphones are muted. Thank you. Sorry, sir.
We are the preamble is a set of standards of human conduct about how we treat each other. Therefore, the Supreme Court is saying this is a compact. The preamble is an agreement on how we will treat each other with dignity, with mutual respect, ensuring that we never trample on the freedom of each other, treating each other with equality. So the idea is that the people of India have decided to constitute India into a reconstitute or remake India into a new social order in which people treat each other according to the norms laid out in the preamble. that is the main aim. Everything else we do must come within that. So if that happens, Safi, economic justice will automatically happen. Political justice will automatically happen. But unless we treat each other in a way that there is no monopoly, no oligopoly, no concentration of power or resources in any community or any group, economic, social, or political group, then there can be no economic justice. So what I mentioned to that student that day is that these standards of conduct apply to all activities, economic, social, and political. So there is no question of economic justice being separate from or in contradiction with ideas of equality and therefore reservation as a means of achieving equal distribution. It is a inherent part of economic justice. Poverty is a result of concentration of wealth and power. And we must also understand that if the social system does not change, is not reconstituted in accordance with the values laid out in the Constitution, then I think we will always have limited opportunity, vast majority of people, and abundant opportunities for a small number of people. So even those who are from the excluded or marginalized sections, oppressed classes, some of them say, okay, I want to get a good package and a good job, and I want to be happy, and I want to have a happy life. But what they don't realize is that for you and for your children, you will always have very limited opportunities from which you may get and somebody else won't get. But if you want to expand the opportunities that you have and your children will have and your grandchildren will have, then the social order has to change. Because this social order, which the people of India are trying to reconstitute, to remake, is a social order in which most of the opportunities are reserved only for a small section of people. So in many states in the country, the cutoff for general category is today lower than OBC and SC/ST in many instances. Because they have effectively made 50% general category and upper caste category, and there are very few of them with 50% of the seats, and 80% of the people or 85% of the people are crowded into the other 50%. So their cutoff has to be higher. So if that has to change, and we all have to get an equitable, fair share of opportunities, even those of us who are pursuing individual ambitions to achieve individual wealth must always remember that the opportunities even available to us are going to be very limited. And the rewards that we get will never be fair. And our children and our grandchildren will never be secure unless we reconstitute in the social order, as we solemnly resolved to do in 1950, based on the standards of conduct which are specified in the preamble. And then last point, and then I'll stop and we can have some discussion, is in this context, one narrative is what is the underlying conflict or context in which we are we are understanding the Constitution and operating the Constitution. Is it a struggle for economic development, ignoring the standard of conduct that governs a relationship with each other? Can we ignore that, allow that to stand, and then achieve economic progress? Slavery is simply a standard of a relationship between white people and African Americans in the United States. Could the United States have made economic progress ignoring that? Slaves were a very small part of the US population. Could they say, this is not an issue? Let us continue to treat African Americans as slaves. That's a standard of relationship. And let us make progress. That's what the South of the United States wanted. They wanted to maintain slavery and make economic progress. And they were making a lot of economic progress in the late 19th century, second half of the 19th century when the Civil War occurred. But Lincoln said, this nation cannot be half slave and half free. He said, what is more important is that we must have the right standard of relationship between people based on equality and freedom. The night before he was murdered, he addressed a small crowd in the White House, in an informal meeting. He made a speech, and his assassin was in that crowd. And he said in that speech that now that we have abolished slavery, we must give black people equal right to vote. And this man told some others in that crowd, this is the last speech he will ever make. And next day he killed him. So the question is, can any country in the world make economic progress without first addressing the question that the Supreme Court has raised in Prithviraj Chauhan? What is the compact, the agreement that you have on how you will treat each other? Are some people permanently condemned to be slaves and others permanently privileged to be slave owners? Or will that standard of relationship or conduct change? Now, this related second issue that is going on, related to this narrative of India wanting to develop, is there is a second question. What is the basis on which India will be united? So the constitution has a narrative. India is constituting itself into a republic, as we said in the preamble. We have resolved to constitute ourselves into a democratic, socialist, secular republic based on liberty, equality, fraternity, democracy, on these principles that I've talked about. And that is the specific type of nation which is envisaged in being constituted by the Constitution. What is that nature of that nation? That nature of that nation is a set of people. A nation is defined as a group of people who are living under a common government or a common system, is one definition of a nation. There is another definition, I'll come to that. So we have decided to constitute ourselves into a nation united by our commitment to, according to the Supreme Court, is a set of values that will govern our relationship to each other. That commitment is what unites India and makes India a nation. Because a nation is a group of people who have come together around some common criteria. So wherefore, what the preamble does is to create a nation, the basis of the unity of which is, because ultimately it says justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, as you know, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. So it's very clear that the preamble is creating a nation, the unity of which is based upon this guarantee of how we will treat each other based on liberty, equality, fraternity, dignity. This nation is under a common government, assuring these values of treatment, values of conduct to everyone, these and rights to everyone, regardless of your background, within that physical territory of India. There is another idea of nation, which you will find in the dictionary. Another idea of nation, perhaps there are only two major ideas of nation. There may be others, but for our purposes, two main ideas of nation. The other idea of nation is a group of people with the same race, same ethnicity, or same religion, or a common birth. This nation has no territorial boundaries. It is not on citizenship, but it is based on social identity. And if you have that social identity, member of that nation, wherever in the world you are. So the Native Americans are considered nations in the United States. Even if a Native American, let's say Cherokee, goes and lives in Switzerland or in India, he will not lose membership of the Cherokee nation, because it's a nation constituted by ethnicity and birth. Now, this is not the nation that is envisaged in the Constitution. The Constitution says we are a nation of citizens. who are also guaranteeing equal rights to non-citizens. But we are a nation of citizens, and these citizens are it's based upon the political principle of citizenship, rights and political principles. We are united by political principles, not by birth, not by social principles, ethnicity, identity, by the political principles laid out in the preamble. And these political principles are applied, safeguarded within the territory of the government. So that's why you go to the international law definition of state, you'll find that the territorial boundaries are very important. There must be a population, a territorial boundary, a government. If you look at the criteria for recognition of countries, of nations, those are political ideas. And once you become a citizen based upon this idea of a nation, you have certain rights. Those rights you can take wherever you go, as long as you have citizenship. Once you renounce that political relationship between you and that nation state, then your membership ends. Then you become someone else. This idea is being challenged by the idea of Hindu Rashtra. Hindu Rashtra is a nation based on religion and ethnicity. Holy land and fatherland. Fatherland is race and ethnicity, and holy land is religion, according to Savarkar's definition of Hindutva. Indians or Hindus, and Hindu has become now read as Indians by the Hindutva movement. Indians are people who have their holy land, the same holy land and the same fatherland, and that must be based in this geography, not necessarily in the territory of India, but in the geography. There's no political idea there. So then they say that anyone who has holy land or fatherland in India, whatever your current passport is, you are a Hindu, you are an Indian. That's the thesis behind the CAA. That Hindus can come wherever you are, because they have redefined the nation as a nation based on ethnicity and religion. They have rejected the idea of nation on the basis of which the constitution is based. So therefore, we have to be very clear in our narrative about the constitution, that the constitution reconstituted India, decided to rearrange and remake India into a community united by political values of freedom and social values of freedom, equality, not economic values. Social and political values of freedom, equality, liberty, dignity, fraternity, and constitute ourselves into a nation under one sovereign government, united, territorial integrity, committed to these political values. And our unity is based on this commitment to these political values. And those who accept the citizenship and accept this constitution, they alone are Indians, no one else. No one is an Indian who does not accept this constitution. In the constitution's idea of a nation. But the Hindu Rashtra has created a very different idea of nation. Of anyone who belongs to a particular religion or particular ethnicity is an Indian, whatever passport you may carry. That idea of a nation is anti-national as far as the constitution is concerned. The constitution has a very specific idea of a republican nation. So the narrative about the context of the constitution, the narrative about what kind of nation this constitution creates, and the role of the constitution in reconstituting, remaking of India is very, very crucial. And lastly, I want to put one more idea here, which is very important issue on which we must clarify the narrative, and that is the idea of merit. For us, that is meritorious, which advances freedom. That is meritorious, which advances. That is meritorious, which advances fraternity. That is meritorious, which advances dignity. The unity of this republican nation based on political principles, where an Indian is only a person who accepts the Republic of India as created under this constitution. That is merit. That is an objective standard of merit. Those who are accepted advance are meritorious because they will advance the project of this constitution. But if you meritorious people who are fundamentally opposed to the project of the constitution, simply because they get marks in an exam. So tomorrow, if a Pakistani who is working in the ISI, lifelong committed to destroy the Republic of the secular, democratic, socialist Republic of India, comes and writes an exam and gets a top mark in the IAS, will we appoint him saying on merit he must be appointed to the IAS? Forgetting the other. Why do we keep out people who are not our nationals if you are really interested in merit? Why do we disqualify so many people from occupying so many positions? Not because it is against merit, because ultimately our understanding of merit is a commitment to the advancement of the principles and objectives of this constitution. And not simply, all of us are people who do evaluation. We know in our own hearts what kind of objectivity is practicable and possible when we evaluate marks, evaluate exams. And somehow I feel, speaking for myself, that all the evaluations I do reflect myself more than the student. So yes, marks students get can be used to evaluate me, not to evaluate them. And in the system that we now have, almost all countries in the world have given up this obsolete idea of merit that we are still throwing around in India. He got so many marks in this exam, so he has merit. Almost all countries in the world have given that up. The IT companies that depend only on knowledge and intellectual output, they don't organize a JEE to choose their staff. They are still struggling with how to identify intelligence and merit. They don't know. There is a book called How to Move Mount Fuji, if you want to read it. How to Move Mount Fuji. That book is about how these top IT companies are struggling with how to recognize and identify merit. And this title comes from a question that some of these IT companies ask candidates. If you had to move Mount Fuji, how would you do it? Because they want to identify and spot creativity. And so when the top knowledge institutions in the world are struggling to identify how to identify merit, we are so easily, based on such obsolete ideas, asserting merit and dismissing people as having without any merit. So I think this is another issue on which our constitutional narrative must cover. So let me, I think, I think I'm happy to connect this maybe very briefly in 1 minute to the questions that were asked to me. I think Safi's question on economic justice, I think I have explained that the idea of economic justice comes from the alternate idea of the constitution as an instrument of Hindu shining and fast economic growth and development, and the poverty through economic development. This is to compare. It is like thinking of America developing without abolishing slavery. So they were foolish to have the Civil War, or the Europeans advancing without abolishing slavery. That is the concept of talking about economic justice without also talking about the need for social change and social reform as fundamental to any idea of economic justice that we must have. We have to change the way we treat each other. If not, there will be no economic justice. And then Vidyut talked about the powers of the. I think this is an artificial debate. This is simply to prevent the 85% of the people from deciding the future fate of India with complete freedom, which is what Dr. Ambedkar favored and I fully favor. And Dr. Ambedkar very much said that he didn't, that the kind of constituent assembly that we had then should not bind future generations. So as long as we have democratic elections, we have democracy inside the parties, and there is a parliament that that will truly reflect the will and of our people. Then I think that parliament should have, really, short of there is an eternity clause in the German constitution now after their experience with Hitler. We may say that you cannot take away democracy. You cannot we can have an eternity clause explicitly in the constitution, not a basic structure doctrine that is interpreted by the judiciary from time to time in an open-ended way. But we must have a very clear eternity clause in the constitution of principles that are non-violable, that I think is important, and to move forward. But Parliament must have, I think, much more ability to reconstitute India into something new, into a democratic society, as we have discussed. And lastly, Disha's question. Disha, again, I think what we are seeing is simply an attempt to undermine the project of the Constitution to reconstitute India into a democratic republic on these political principles. And I have no doubt in my mind that reservation is a fundamental right. And I think we separately will organize a webinar on that, and we will explain the law behind that very clearly. And we must stop the smuggling of fundamental rights from Part 3 to Part 4, conversion of rights into directive principles, which is a trend that is now starting. So I think and on the last thing is on morality, a question that was asked to me on morality. This Vidyut and I have discussed in some detail. I think in the simple chart I have in my mind is at the bottom of the chart, there is the morality that we practice in our day-to-day life. The morals that we follow, not morality, and the morals that we apply to our day-to-day life. Morals also comes from the word mores, which is what we do in our normal practice. So what are the standards of right and wrong that we follow in our day-to-day lives? That is influenced by three factors above us. One is a system of morality. System of morality is formed through a complex informal process, institutional processes, but without the state necessarily being involved, but although the state influences it. So there is a morality is a system of morals. And that system of morals, or at least our consciousness of it, our understanding of it, what is explained to us about it, affects the morals we follow in our day-to-day life, undoubtedly. So that is one influence that influences the morals we follow in our day-to-day life, namely what is right and wrong. Second set of influences that affect us in the right and wrong that we follow in day-to-day life is what is law, which is those rules which may or may not come from morality, but those rules that we consider important or not important, but the state picks up and gives a special status and says the state declares those to be mandatory rules of conduct or standards of conduct, and will back it up with its enforcement powers if you don't follow them. So that also influences the morals of our day-to-day life. So we have morality as an informal and complex system of morals that influences us. We have law, and then finally we have justice. Justice is the highest standard of human conduct that influences us remotely or in a proximate way, and affects the way we exercise. We accept the way in which we practice principles of right and wrong in our daily life. So we have morals influenced by morality, law, and justice. Now, what is constitutional morality? Now, the Constitution provides the foundation for both law and justice that we know. For the state's idea of law, of morality, namely law, and the state's idea of what is right and wrong, standard of right and wrong, which is what the state considers to be justice. Although the idea of justice as a standard of human conduct, which is what I personally call it, can exist outside the state as well. Now, in this architecture, what is constitutional morality? Now, whatever system of morals we have, we follow, whether it is state or non-state, there are a lot of rules of right and wrong which are very explicit, very clear, maybe codified, maybe clearly articulated, clearly said, a lot of which are conventions and traditions, which are necessary to uphold the explicit rules. So when we talk of constitutional morality, we are talking about the less explicit traditions and conventions that are necessary to be followed in order to uphold the main rules of law and the main principles of justice which flow from the Constitution. So Ambedkar, as you know, in the Constituent Assembly was the one who introduced the idea of constitutional morality to India when he was asked why this constitution is so detailed. And he said that is because the conventions that are necessary to apply the principles of law and justice that are in this constitution, in the preamble and so on, are simply non-existent in India. Amongst the ruling classes, they don't have conventions and traditions and customs on how to respect each other, how to respect freedom, how to respect equality, fraternity, dignity. And that's why people are being thrown into jail, because we don't have the constitutional morality of freedom. And that this is not the way in which we treat people. We just throw people into jail. 70% of our prisoners are under trial prisoners. So Ambedkar explained that in the absence of detailed rules, which are part of our informal practice that we will not violate. We have seen how Trump has violated a lot of constitutional norms and how people are very upset about that, because these are well accepted norms for 200 years, 240 years, and he's not following them. So we don't have those norms. So Ambedkar said that's why we have to have a very detailed constitution, because this morality is absent from our powerful segments of our society. And if they have to obey them, we have to write them down. And so he converted morality into constitutional law, constitutional morality into constitutional law. But still there is a large amount of, of customs and traditions that flow from these constitutional principles which are in the preamble, which we've talked about a lot today. And that is what we refer to as constitutional morality. And one other difference we have with the Western countries is that their discussion on justice and jurisprudence stands on the foundation of Christianity and Christian ethics, because they're very predominantly Christian countries with a long tradition of struggle for a new set of social values. Enlightenment is a very important example of that. Reformation and Enlightenment were struggles about normative issues. So therefore, and they have the Bible, and they have principles that they believe in, moral principles that come from their religion, and they refer to Christian morality and Christian ethics. So that is a shared base that those societies have had. And on that, they are building constitutions and ideas of law and justice, which they don't need to put as much detail into the constitution or in the law, because everyone accepts the complementary ideas of morality which come from their religion. Ambedkar's argument is that the ruling classes of India are not only lacking in these traditions and customs that are in sync with the morality of the Constitution, namely based on freedom and equality and dignity and fraternity, but they are actually in conflict with it. They want to undermine it. They want to bring it down, and therefore it is necessary to legislate constitutional morality and also observe it as much as possible. Yeah. So in a nutshell, constitutional morality is those traditions, those customs of conduct and action, ethical concepts of action and conduct, which must be followed to strengthen and secure the values in the preamble of freedom, equality, liberty, dignity, and fraternity. In other words, even the informal practices of the elite classes, ruling classes, bureaucrats, teachers, judges, even their informal traditions and conduct should not undermine the constitutional values of the Republic. They should support them. And for that, I think it is very important to select into critical positions people who, from their hearts and minds and souls, are not only committed to these values of the Constitution, but actually have a stake in them. Something, not something to lose from the implementation of these constitutional ideas and models. I think I've answered these various questions. I've spoken longer than I wanted to, but I've made these points.
Oh, what a wonderful and insightful presentation of thoughts that it was. Thank you so much, sir. And I'm quite sure that all of you might have learned a lot from the discussion so far we have heard. And just only for the sake of Binish and Sujit, who was a bit late for joining, I'll just, within 3 minutes, I'll just conclude. I mean, I'll just give a very, very brief picture of what Sir said. So he started with the existence of narratives. And he said that there is a predominant constitutional narrative that exists now, which reinforces the previous social order values like Savarna, hierarchy, oppression, merit, or a birth merit kind of a concept. So a narrative which reinforces those values exists. And he pointed out, we require a counter narrative because the predominant narrative which is existing is anti-constitutional. That was the first point. And second, he said that constitution is not a political document, or it is not any legal document as such, but rather it is a process. It is a process of making India, or constituting India, or reconstituting India. That is the second point. Third point, this process of making India has to be done in accordance with certain values recognized by the Constitution. So we can call it as the constitutional values based on which making India should happen. That is the third point. And he identified those values as the values which is enshrined in the preamble of the Constitution. Justice, equality, and liberty, the most prominent. Fourth point is that all these values are not independently existing islands, but they are mutually related with each other. Each value gets its meaning from the other values. So we cannot interpret a particular value without associating it with other values. So equality gets its meaning from liberty and justice. And justice gets its meaning from liberty, equality, etc. So there is a necessity for, sir, please intervene if I am wrong.
You're brilliant, wonderful, very excellent.
Okay. So interpretation of constitutional, when we do interpretation of constitutional values, we need to have a very comprehensive view of all the values which is recognized in the preamble. So this is what is exactly lacking. and some people take a particular value independently and try to give a meaning which is inconsistent with their own personal bias. And fourth point is that there are certain challenges to this idea of making India in accordance with constitutional values. And this challenge is from certain forces which wants to, as sir pointed out in the beginning, which wants to reinforce those traditional older values of hierarchy, suppression, etc. And these forces are now unfortunately in power. And those who are not only in power politically, but also judicially. So they are in power in the judiciary. And therefore, such judicial forces are inventing legal techniques to interpret constitution to sustain the social structure which we wanted to change. So therefore, this project of counter narrative assumes more significance, and therefore it is highly necessary from our part to contribute this project of counter narrative by theorizing, by inventing concepts which would reinforce this narrative, and also by producing legal materials like statutes and precedents to support this narrative, and in implementing the real constitutional values that would reconstitute India. So these are the points he has made very nicely. So I think, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I think now we can have further discussion. Sir, Mohan Gopal sir.
Yes, certainly.
So I think I just take this opportunity to request Soman sir to reflect upon and to contribute to the discussion. Sir.
I don't know how far I can add more to the thought process it has been. I got a slightly different perception of the Indian society and the constitutional order which we are having. I used to visualize that the constitution is a document which structures the power, grants the power, limits the power. And also it contains aspirations to which we want to lead our nation, which is in crisp, it is being reflected in the preamble of the Constitution itself. And at the same time, I used to think that to have a constitution like India's Constitution, we require a society which should satisfy certain prerequisites, which is require or rather to be making it ready to receive these value perceptions underlying the Constitution. And this cleavage is already been there in India. Because as an Indian society, I don't think that we received the ideals of justice, ideals of equality, because we always been the hierarchy. And the feudal hierarchical social order continues to be in existence. And what is required is to have a social revolution in that respect, so that the Indian society becomes capable of receiving these value perceptions underlying the Constitution. And I fear that, as Sir is suggesting, the Constitution sustains values which it want to enforce against individuals, then the concept of liberty vis-a-vis the state power may obliterate. And my freedom in certain levels which I want to enjoy, if it is going to be structured by the constitutional norms, then the freedom itself will be in danger. So I used to think in this line always that Constitution is not a document which addresses me as a person. It addresses those who have been in authority in their dealing with the people. So in between me and another individual, I don't say that I can do anything which I pleases. That is being governed by a system of legal rules and regulation which already have in existence. Of course, that is also been overseen by the constitutional structuring, to what extent that freedom I can exercise. And only in those cases of extreme violations of unacceptable behavioral pattern, for example, practice of untouchability, where you say that, of course, there is power for the state to regulate, prohibit and penalize. That's exactly what it did through our legislative processes. But when I say nicely going there, if I go for a market of marriage and to have my own choice of a spouse, I don't think that Indian Constitution, and we say that the equality principle, non-discriminatory principles are to be accepted by me, so that I cannot say no to a girl by saying that you don't belong to my religion or my caste or my subcaste or my state or my language. Many qualifications which traditionally we fall in line. And I don't think that the Constitution's principles of non-discrimination will be binding me. Otherwise, I have to answer for every girl which I suggest what exactly is the constitutionally acceptable reason for me not to accept them. But at the same time, the extreme levels of untouchability and social exclusion, that things are coming, then there is a legal process through which we can regulate the behavior of the individual concerned. So in that way, you may say there is a power which has been granted to the state to see that this state's dealing is being fairly been done. The other is then individual interstate behavior is not being in tune with acceptable values for a democratic process or a free liberal democratic society. It is open for the society, the governmental structure, the parliament or the legislature to come with legal regulation and enforce it. This cleavage I used to think, I don't know whether I am right in thinking like that, because otherwise I fear that my liberty will always be at the mercy of somebody else. Because I will be forced to behave in a manner the way in which the others think that I should be coming like. So in extreme levels, I say that you have the power. Don't practice untouchability or that types of atrocities or even oppressing others who are supposed to be subordinated to me in caste hierarchy or in other fortunates of the life. In that level, the picture which we get from whether these constitutional norms are really been something which address me as an individual, I got some reservations or some doubts. This is what I feel about Mohan Gopal's presentation and my personal perception of what should be the two ways in which it is to be appreciated. Otherwise, the liberty, I feel, because the state action doctrine of America, if they comes at the first day, the state should be there. Otherwise, there is no question of extending this because you fear that your domain of liberty will always be curtailed by that process. And I feel that India also, we may get into that process of curtailing this freedom. This is what the immediate reaction which comes to my mind.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I think now the battlefield is on.
No. Yeah. Very good. Sir, may I very briefly respond to that? Sir, no contradiction at all between what I'm saying and what you're saying, sir, because you are basically making the distinction between public and private. What is public and what is private?
Yes,
and my
yes,
entire,
sir.
I assumed I should have made it clear, but my entire discussion is about the public space, not about the private space. And so obviously, what kind of values you
Sound is breaking.
belief, faith, and worship.
Sir, it is not audible.
5 times.
Mohan Gopal sir, ഇടയ്ക്ക് just ഒന്ന് break ആവുന്നുണ്ട്.
No.
Okay.
Clear.
Okay.
Now it is clear.
Okay, sir.
Sir, ഒന്നും കൂടെ idea repeat ചെയ്യാമോ? അതൊന്ന് clear ആവുന്നു.
Yeah, yes, I will repeat. So what I'm saying, sir, if that is the distinction public and what is private. And your main point is that this discussion on constitution should not affect the private space. I'm totally agreed with you. And I think the constitution itself provides a very large, expansive protection of the private space and privacy, as has been discussed in the privacy judgment of the Supreme Court quite extensively. But it is also reflected in the preamble of 5 types of liberty: thought, expression, all kinds of speech and everything, thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, right? And then we come to the 7 types of freedoms in Article 19: speech and expression, assembly, association, movement, and residence, right? And then practicing any profession. So we have an extensive space where the state, no one can, not only state, individual, society, not just the state, but even other social groups, community groups cannot dictate to us. So I certainly agree with that. But the difference between public and private, where to draw the line, is a very philosophically complex issue, legally complex issue, as you know more than me. And ultimately, it's a question of liberty. And the one principle is that your liberty cannot be interfered with except to protect someone else's liberty. And so if I say I want to marry someone from my community, and I force that woman from my community to marry me, saying you shall not marry someone from outside my community, then I cannot say it's a private matter. So the core principles of must be protected even in the private space, so that no one, even in the private space, is deprived of liberty, dignity. So I always say that when an Indian woman stands up in the middle of the night and tells her husband, "You shall not beat me," she's actually asserting a fundamental right under Article 21. In their bedroom in the middle of the night. And you can't say that the Constitution stops outside their bedroom. Unfortunately for us, under the Indian Penal Code, and I've been strongly campaigning against this, the husband can rape her, and there is an exemption to marital rape, which is very unfortunate. But and that I believe is unconstitutional also. So there are issues of to what extent will these rights enter the private space, but that is a separate matter of controversy. But in principle, I agree with you that our discussion was about public discrimination, Article 14, Article 15, Article 16. In public spaces, I don't mean government spaces. I mean by public that from which an individual in your private capacity does not have the power to exclude. As you know, the property is a power to exclude. Is that space from which no private individual can exclude somebody else. My house is my private space because I can say I can exclude anyone I want from my private space. I cannot exclude anyone from my office room if I'm holding an office, or even a company, anything that requires a public support and cooperation, then I have to go by public norms. So this is a separate topic, but I agree with you. I want to clarify that my whole discussion applies to the public space, leaving open the complex question of how do you draw the line between public and private. So I don't see any disagreements between what you have said. I should have clarified at the beginning, but that our discussion is only on matters of public relationships.